America can certainly afford two wars, U.S. Treasury Secretary says. And it's not just Janet Yellen, but last night, Joe Biden appeared on 60 Minutes in some crackpottery, as he often does engage in, and said that we're the most powerful nation in the world, man. We can go to war in Israel. What up? I'm just like banging the war drums. Lindsey Graham coming out being like, you know, we got to bomb Iran right now without evidence. And I'm just like, oh, here we go. You know what I'm thinking? They are going to start war with Iran. There's going to be some kind of escalation of war before Donald Trump can become president. They need to put Trump in a position where he has no choice but to be in these wars. You see, here's a big problem for the machine. The machine loves war, conquest, territorial gains, expansion of energy dominance, securing the petrodollar, and funding the military-industrial complex. While we mostly view the military-industrial complex as a bunch of rich people who like getting rich off war, the reality is the U.S. loves the idea that it has too many guns. And we can point them at anybody we don't like. So the problem with Donald Trump is that he gets in office and he goes, no new wars. Uh-oh. Then he comes out and says, we're going to get our troops out of these wars. Uh-oh. They got to put a stop to that. They can't let that happen. And so this is where we're at. I think it's entirely likely that sometime within the next 12 months, we will be engaged in full-scale warfare beyond just Ukraine. Perhaps we'll be dragged into an actual ground war in Ukraine. The U.S. will formally mobilize. Perhaps it will be Israel and Iran, but they need the war. Now, a lot of people have said a wartime president has never lost, but I don't think that counts as Joe Biden. You know, wartime presidents usually a little bit more cohesive and coherent. I mean, I understand that George W. Bush wasn't particularly articulate, but he was still like with it. You know what I mean? He could talk. And people kind of like that. He seemed like a regular guy. That's how they described him. Joe Biden can't even talk. Churning on a shabbat of pressure. Come on. Batacalf Karen, next all Rescent. The dude's got words we ain't never heard of. So if war were to break out, I think people are going to look to stronger leadership. In fact, Donald Trump will campaign on resolving the war, but he will be in it. And then once he gets into office, there's nothing he can do. The war will be raging. Now, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, I think Donald Trump absolutely can resolve that conflict. And if that was it, that'd be it. But what happens when it's Iran, Lebanon, Syria, etc.? Donald Trump is not going to just abandon Israel if there is full-scale active warfare, and he's not going to be able to negotiate down multiple countries. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it is a daunting task which will lock Donald Trump into command over a war. Here's a story from Sky News. I mean, the story is the quote. You get it right there. America can certainly afford two wars, U.S. Treasury Secretary says. Oh, I love this stuff. Speaking exclusively to Wilfred Frost ahead of a meeting with finance ministers in Luxembourg, the U.S. Treasury Secretary said that the economy and public finances were in good shape to ensure backing for U.S. interests abroad. Two? We can afford three. Heck, we're so rich, we got $33 trillion in debt. Does it remain too early to understand the economic ramifications of the latest conflict, with oil and natural gas prices remaining volatile amid growing concerns of a wider war in the Middle East, which seems to be on the horizon? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the clip from 60 Minutes, which, oh boy, let me play it for you.
The president is asking
Here we go. Billions of dollars.
And Ukraine.
Let's start over. Sorry about that.
The president is asking for billions of dollars for Israel and Ukraine. But Congress is paralyzed. Hard-right Republicans are obstructing the election of a Speaker of the House.
Full stop. What does hard right mean? It means nothing. It means other. That's it. Oh, but you're going to love this. Let's break down the propaganda while giving you the news at the same time.
Does the dysfunction that we've seen in Congress increase the danger in the world?
Yeah. Full stop. Dysfunction? This is the intended condition. Members of Congress having to negotiate instead of marching in lockstep. You see what these people are on about? They're psychotic.
Yes. Look, this is not your father's Republican Party.
Good.
30% of it is made up of these MAGA Republicans who are maybe, democracy is something they don't look at it the same way you and I look at democracy.
You right about that?
Are the wars in Israel and Ukraine more than the United States can take on at the same time?
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense.
Russia's unprovoked invasion occupies nearly 20% of Ukraine.
Full stop. Unprovoked propaganda. Hey, look, man, I get it, okay? The United States is not going to be using language against its own interests. So it will absolutely say Russia was unprovoked. But that's the stupidest thing in the world. Like, Russia one day was just sitting there, Vladimir Putin's like leaning back like that Bugs Bunny meme, and he's like, invade. Dude, there's reasons for all of this. The U.S.-backed ousting of Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine. The argument back then in 2014, when I was down there, 2013, was that Russia wanted to rebuild the trade federation. But many people in Ukraine viewed that as like Soviet 2.0, and they don't like the Russians because of what happened 100 years ago. Not even 100 years ago, 80 years ago. And so, when Ukraine's being courted by the East and the West, sentiment generally favored the West. Russia did not like this. The U.S. backed protests, which resulted in the ousting of Yanukovych. I'm being a little light on the language here. Many people would say it was a CIA-backed coup. Either way, this was a territorial dispute with multiple factions involved. Russia knows this. Now, in order to get you to spend money, we got to sell, baby. Come on. Imagine if I went to you and said, ladies and gentlemen, we need your support here at Timcast. Go to timcast.com, click join us, and become a member so that I can buy a new car. You'd be like, that's the worst pitch I've ever heard. And that's not why we have memberships at timcast.com. I'll give you a better pitch. My pay, for me personally, comes from advertising on this show right now. The Tim Pool Daily Show, the videos I put out in the morning that I produce and host and run all by myself, is where the money comes to me. The money I make from these, I pay myself with it. Everything else, Timcast IRL memberships, goes towards all the projects we're doing, the staff, the expansion, IT, etc., booking travel, investing in projects, Times Square billboards, things like that. Don't get me wrong. This inflates my net worth, right? I am valuing from your membership. But the point is, here's a real pitch. Become a member at timcast.com so that you can help us win the culture war, so that we can fight the good fight, seek out true information that helps regular people find solutions so their lives are better, so we avoid nuclear annihilation. If you think we're doing a good job of that, then go to timcast.com and become a member. Here's my point. I use that as an example because I want you to be a member, but realistically, I'm not going to come out and give you a sales pitch that sucks. That's the stupidest thing in the world. You can become a member, I guess. I mean, we're working really hard. We do some stuff. Like, that's pathetic. I've done sales. No, you come out and say, if you want the best cup of coffee you've ever had in your life, go to castbrew.com and buy. Yeah, obviously, we think our coffee is good and all that, but we're going to be excited and enthusiastic about it. As for the United States, the U.S. wants to win this territory. It's their interests. I don't think it's the interests of the entirety of the American people, but their competing interests in this country. For the establishment, their goal is to secure Ukraine. So, of course, they're going to say unprovoked. And there's more. That's the game they play. They want you to march in lockstep. I don't live in that world. I live in a world where we are informed and try to make the best decisions we can. Now, unfortunately, there may be good reasons for why the U.S. is involved in these conflicts, but they don't give them to us. They lie, they cheat, and they steal. I call that a bad pitch. If U.S. intelligence agencies came out and gave an honest assessment, a realistic assessment, we might actually consider some kind of reasonable aid to the region. Now, I mean it. The argument would be there's no reason for us to be involved in these conflicts. I stand opposed to them, right? That would be your argument. Typically, it's mine. What if they came out and made a real sales pitch? We might be like, wow, well, okay, I guess. Here's the issue. There probably isn't one. That's where I stand. I think sometimes intervention, rarely, if ever. That's why I'm usually against it, 90% of the time. Let's play more.
Hundreds of thousands have been killed or wounded. In an interview last month, President Volodymyr Zelensky told us he could lose without U.S. aid. How do these wars in Israel and Ukraine relate to the safety of the American people?
Overwhelmingly, they relate. For example, in Ukraine, one of my objectives was to prevent Putin, who has committed war crimes himself.
Bang. Oh, there we go. War crimes. Spare me, dude. War crimes. Anybody truly trying to win a war, dude, there's no question. None whatsoever. Let me ask you. You're in your house and someone breaks in and they're armored. And your home defense weapon, useless. However, you do have boiling oil on your stove for making donuts. Would you defend yourself against this person by any means necessary? Look, the answer is yes. Obviously, I don't know who advocates for hitting somebody with boiling oil. That's crazy. But most people will do whatever they have to defend themselves and their interests. I don't know why this guy's breaking in your house. My point is this. War crimes. Russia doesn't care what you think a war crime is. Russia is seeking power and resources and security for itself. That means winning is all that matters. Two people engage in a fight. Certainly there's a right and there's a wrong. But let's say these people are fighting over the ownership of a pot of gold that was found at the end of a rainbow. And you're like, I don't know who owns it or why they think they own it. And one guy splashes the other guy or blasts him with white phosphorus. The other guy bursts into flames and then falls to dust and splinters away into the wind. Then, years later, they say, what happened? And I was sitting here with my pot of gold. This guy attacked me, and that's what's written down. All that matters is the people who want to win, who feel they should win. To people in this conflict. The idea that, Biden comes out and says he's committed war crimes. Right. He wants to rally you against a war criminal. Sure. Russia is saying we're the war criminals too. That's the way the game is played. Now, certainly someone's lying. Don't get me wrong. Or they're both telling the truth and just ignoring their own faults. Right. The U.S. is not innocent when it comes to global conflict because we're all just fighting over interests and we just want to win.
Who, from being able to occupy an independent country that borders NATO allies and is on the Russian border. Imagine what happens now if he were able to succeed. Have you ever known a major war in Europe we didn't get sucked into? We don't want that to happen.
Wait, okay. So hold on there a minute, sir. You're saying in order to avoid getting sucked into international conflict in Europe, we are going to choose to enter an international conflict in Europe. Wonderful. Wonderful. I'd like to point out and counter this and say, hey, look, Russia seized the Donbass stretching all the way down to the Crimea region, the land bridge that everyone said they were after. Looks like Russia secured what they were trying to secure, control of the Black Sea. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk and have a nice day. Yeah, I love it. What they're trying to do is get us involved in a multi-pronged war. And I think that'll be our downfall.
And is on the Russian border. Imagine what happens now if he were able to succeed. Have you ever known a major war in Europe we didn't get sucked into? We don't want that to happen. We want to make sure those democracies are sustained. And Ukraine is critical in making sure that happens.
That is the worst argument advocating for U.S. intervention I have ever heard. I can give you an argument. I'm not saying it'll convince you, but I can certainly give a way better argument than Joe Biden. You see, Joe Biden is giving these empty platitudes, these garbage statements. We can afford war. We're so strong. We're so tough. What? I can give you an argument. Here's one. Europe is constrained with a waning population. People are not having kids, causing a serious crisis of what the future of these nations will look like. Those in power are concerned that power will leave them, so they're advocating for mass migration, as they are in the United States. Ultimately, this is a big problem that needs to be solved through a cultural reformation of sorts or revolution. People need to get back to supporting their values. But the real issue, I think, is when it comes to the war, here's a better argument than Joe Biden could give you. Russia controls a large portion of natural gas flowing into Europe. Europeans require this. The cost of natural gas is sending money to Russia at a high rate, which Russia is then using in their alliance with China. For Western powers to gain dominance in the economic battle with BRICS and NATO and the petrodollar, we need to offset that Gazprom monopoly, of which Ukraine is a principal player. Once we secure Ukraine, the Donbass, Syria, and are aligned with Turkey, we can then start competing, Qatar-Turkey pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't say it was a good argument. But a better argument is we are in an international conflict with powerful nations who seek to disrupt the petrodollar, which is what sustains the American way of life and your quality of life. We are trying to build a gas pipeline to compete in a free and open market with Russia, but Russia opposes this, and we couldn't secure the treaties. Here's the problem. The reason why I say I can give a better argument, but I don't think it's convincing, is that, we destabilize Syria for cheap gas? Is it really worth the humanitarian cost? For the people who are engaging in these wars, their views are it is better that everyone outside of the U.S. suffer so that we maintain control and power. Now, some of these people think they're superheroes. They think that they're staving off World War III. In fact, I think quite the opposite. I think they're engaging in World War III. They are going to make it happen. They are playing a game of chicken. They think I can just push so hard that you will back down. But they won't, because you're fighting ideologues. And so you're not gonna win. It's a crazy prospect. The idea that we've got nukes and we've got air superiority and you're not willing to go to war with us. Sooner or later, that's not going to fly, man. It is a losing proposition. My proposal is economics, technology. What did we do? We outsourced all of our manufacturing and research and development. Not all of it, most of it. Well, that's stupid. What do we have to stand on now? Guns. Yep. Guns and gas. We got the guns, so we control the gas. Well, that's faltering. And we don't now have the technology to maintain this position. Because look at the CHIPS Act. We have Taiwan making our silicon chips. Why? That's crazy. Yeah, we're going to start building a plant here in the United States to compete, but what were they thinking? It's absolutely absurd. So here we now have Joe Biden and Janet Yellen outright and explicitly stating, we have the means for more war. More war is coming. I think that's the likely outcome. CBS calls the interview. Biden stresses commitment to Israel, but says there needs to be a path to a Palestinian state. That's impossible. I just don't see it as a possibility. The people in Gaza want to eradicate Israel from the river to the sea. 1948, Civil War. Israel wins. Over the next several decades, 1967, for instance, Palestine shrinks. It's smaller and smaller. They're losing a war. That's it. That's what it is. It's war and they lost. And they want all of it. There's no simple solution here. So all that I see is escalation. The idea of a Palestinian state. I feel like this is Joe Biden being like, I have to act, what is it? Humble, pragmatic, optimistic, magnanimous. No. That's what I want you to think. The reality is the U.S. is just saying, if we had all of it, if we had U.S.-aligned armed guards everywhere, we'd be better off for it. Look at Afghanistan. Nation building. Look at South Korea. Now, South Korea is an interesting one. I mean, South Korea is obviously better off than North Korea. And is that what we would prescribe for every other country? You see, the problem is perhaps it made sense that when the Korean War broke out, you had the Soviet Union on one side and the U.S. on the other, we were engaged in a Cold War. Perhaps it made sense that we tried to stop global communism. I don't see how it makes sense that we go to Afghanistan and spend 2 decades building a nation, which has now just fallen to the Taliban and is falling apart. That just seems like one big waste of time. I suppose a simple way to put it is the people who built the system for which we benefited from had children who don't know how to maintain it. And so I don't see how war is the solution to any of it. Biden certainly isn't all with it. He can't maintain this. And engaging in another conflict with Israel just stretches us thin already. The real thing they're saying is not that we're the most powerful nation and we can afford this. They're saying we're only the most powerful nation because people fear us for our guns. But now we're getting Russia saying, I'll call your bluff. And the end result? Escalation of war into World War III. What a pathetic idea. We need cultural reformation. Globally. We need diplomatic solutions. And you know what really does help end war is trade. TPP, wouldn't it, The TPP was breeding more conflict, and Trump ended that. I think it was the right move. Trade is good, but the U.S. giving up its manufacturing base is not good. It's destructive. We need to make stuff. China makes stuff. We trade with each other. Instead, the U.S. said, China will make it, and we'll point guns at everybody else. They'll be forced to use our currency. That is not a realistic solution. So, I hope you're ready, everybody. I think we're going to get the outbreak of major war in the next 12 months. I could be wrong, but they're telling us. They're waving it in our faces that we're already involved in 2 wars. 2 new ones. That's what you get when you vote for a Joe Biden. If Donald Trump had been elected in 2020, we would not be looking at this crisis. Unquestionably. There would be no invasion of Ukraine. There would be no attack in Israel. I know. They said they're planning for 2 years. All under Joe Biden. All under Joe. Can you believe? It's 2023 already. Man, we are getting very close now to the presidential race. We'll see how this one goes. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.